So could you just talk a little bit about what you do now?
Sure. So I'm Steve Cohen. I'm one of the two founding partners of a law firm here in New York City called Pollock Cohen. We started the firm 4 years ago, and we do three things. And the intent was always to do these three things. First, we do False Claims Act, whistleblower law. The second thing are class actions on behalf of plaintiffs. And the third, what we call public impact law. And I'll give you an example of each of those, but we'll start with the public impact because I'm literally up to my eyeballs in a case. We represent 250,000 New York City retirees, all former municipal workers, police officers, firefighters, teachers, sanitation men, professors. And New York City, about 6 months ago, decided, for understandable policy reasons, that they wanted to change the vested health benefits that these 250,000 people have enjoyed for more than 40 years. And they wanted to do it for a logical reason. It would shift the $600 million a year cost from the city budget to the federal budget. There's only one problem. It was illegal. And that's what we alleged. And we just won a decision 2 weeks ago saying the court said to the city, you can't do that. It's illegal. Last night at 8:40 p.m., the city filed its appeal and tried to rush a decision by the appellate court today. So literally, it was the closest thing I've done to an all-nighter since I was at Brown. And we put in papers at just before, about 8:40 this morning, 12 hours later, saying to the court, you can't rush this. This is an important issue. It's got to be on the traditional briefing schedule, and it impacts the lives of 250,000 senior citizen and disabled first responders. And at issue, as I said, is $600 million a year. So it's big stakes, healthcare and money. So that's what we do. So we do those three things, and we just were hired today. We hired our 11th lawyer. And again, in the same space, she actually has a specialty in mental health work because we are going to be bringing an important case on mental health parity. Insurance companies are required by law to treat mental health issues just as they treat physical health issues. Problem with most health insurance companies, they treat that the first bad, they treat the second bad. So they don't provide either. So we're about to bring a class action on behalf of people who are entitled to mental health care and aren't getting it from their insurance company.
So it's a boutique firm, right?
Well, 11 lawyers, it was a really boutique firm. And we're in a temporary office here because we're building out new offices. Yes, the answer is we're a boutique firm. But boy, we've grown enormously in 4 years from 2 of us to now 11 attorneys.
And how do you think working at a smaller law firm, obviously, how do you think that affects sort of your day-to-day compared to working for like a Jones Day or a Kirkland & Ellis?
Well, happily, I've never had to work or tried to work, nor would they have me at a Jones Day or a Kirkland & Ellis. But everybody here, the partners get involved in almost every case. There's always a partner on a case, and it's very collaborative. The best boss I ever had was a senior editor, managing editor at Time Inc. And his name was Don Sider. And it was during the days when Time was the most influential and successful publishing company, certainly in America, maybe in the world. And Don said we only hire bright people. We can, we were known as Paradise Publishing in those days. And really, it was a tremendous, tremendous company. He said, we hire only smart people, but no individual is as smart as any two. My job is to get you to work together. There's a force multiplier in that. And that's my job here. I'm a fairly new lawyer. I went to law school at age 58 and I'd had a reasonably successful career, as a publisher and as an author before that. And my job is really to get people to work together. And as a result, we punch above our weight class. We're up against the Jones Days and the Kirkland & Ellis's regularly. And we think we hold our own pretty darn well.
That's good perspective, especially on teamwork. So let's talk a little bit about how you went to law school as a 58-year-old. So my understanding is that you had a successful career in the publishing industry for a little while, maybe
More than
for
a little while,
longer,
35
maybe
years.
for
Yeah.
longer than a little while. And tell us a little bit about how someone, given your background, would feel the need to go to law school and how you ended up
Drinking.
making that decision.
Drinking. Be careful who you go drinking with is the moral of the story. And I'm not kidding. I was at a party and I was talking to a woman whom I just met. And I was telling her a story about I had just written an article for the Manhattan Institute's City Journal, their quarterly magazine. And the story was about my experience on a terrorism trial. I was a juror. And after the trial, I wrote about it. It was a front page New York Times case. And during voir dire, I said to the judge, you really don't want me on this jury. I mean, it sounds really interesting. I'm going to wind up writing about it. And he said, well, just don't write about it during the case. Can you be fair? I said, of course I can be fair, but you really don't want me. I said, no. If you can be fair, I do want you. And I was on the jury. And I didn't write about it until afterwards. So I'm telling this woman at this party about the case. And there were some really interesting legal twists that came up during the case. And she said to me, that's really interesting. Are you a lawyer? I said, no, I just dress like one. She said, come on, don't be a wise guy. He said, forgive me, my wife's over there. She'll confirm I am a wise guy. But I'll tell you the truth, our youngest kid is going off to college. We're about to be empty nesters. If I didn't have to take the LSAT, I'd go to law school now. She looked at me as if I were nuts. She said, at your age? I said, yeah, at my age. Fine, you're accepted. Excuse me? She said, you're accepted. I said, who are you? And she answered, I'm a dean at New York Law School. She called my bluff at a party. She said, school starts on August 15th. Write a check and show up. You're accepted. And I did. So she called my bluff in front of other people, drink in hand, and I went to law school at age 58. Literally spur of the moment. No more preparation. I had considered going. I was planning to go after I graduated from Brown, but life went in other directions and I didn't. So now, all these years later, I went off to law school and I loved it. And it was much easier for me in many ways because obviously the stakes were different. I had had a reasonably successful career. I could always go back to it, that career. And one other really important advantage, I understood how the world worked. I understood something about business and about politics and about management. And it was easier in that respect. It was harder because I hadn't studied. I hadn't read anything with that intensity in 30-something years. And it was hard. The brain is a muscle and it's hard to train it again. And yet I loved it. It also made me understand something about myself, which was an important revelation. For 30 odd years, I had been an adjunct professor in MBA programs here in New York, always at night at Fordham and NYU. And teaching, what I realized was what a jerk I had been to those students as an adjunct professor. I never had any sense of how difficult it was to be an evening student until I became one. And again, the stakes were different for me, but here I am sitting in class, starting at 6 o'clock at night, going to almost 10 o'clock at night. And these were my classmates were people who were juggling lives, jobs, school, relationships, and it is hard. So if I ever do it again, if I ever go back and teach again, I won't be any easier, but I'll be more understanding. And that was an important self-recognition as a result of going to law school at this age.
So with your experience at the publishing industry, what have you learned about the writing and publication process that you think most people would probably find surprising?
Well, first, what you think you're writing is probably not good enough because writing is not hard. Rewriting is hard. I gave a talk at Brown about 6-7 years ago about this topic. And I was just invited to the Harvard Club here in New York to talk to young recent graduates of Harvard about using the ability to get published to enhance one's career. And one of the things I tell everybody is you're going to get rejected. I get rejected. I mean, I am not a particularly good writer. I'm an incredibly successful writer in that I think everything I have written in the last 10 years has been published somewhere. Not often, not my first choice, but I've been, and part of it is just the recognition, the self-discipline to rewrite. Because what I put down on paper in that first and second and third drafts, I know isn't good enough. It's not bad, but it's not good enough. The second thing that people don't realize, and they must do, is read the publication they want to get published in. You're not going to change a publication. The publication wants what it wants. And there are specific rules and strategies to get published. And the second most important one, after the recognition that you're going to get rejected, is really read the publication. Look at what it publishes and write for that publication. And if you do that, you're halfway there.
So does that mean writing about things that you anticipate the publication is looking for?
Well, you have to write for something they want to publish about. Now, there are other rules. For example, why are you writing about this? Do you have any credibility? Do you have any standing to write about this topic? There are a million topics I couldn't even try to write about, even for publications where I get published regularly, because I have no expertise. I have no expertise, but I've built out expertise in 3 or 4 areas, always in public policy, that I'm going to have a reasonable shot at getting published in most major publications. But if I stray from those 3 or 4 or 5 areas, I don't have a chance, or I have a very, very low chance.
Forgive me if this sounds like a cynical question. How much do personal relationships matter en route to being published?
Good relationships always help. I'll give you an example. You never send an attachment to an editor without their permission. They're not going to open it. They don't know who you are. And when you send out an email asking the publication, asking the editor, are you interested? It uses in the subject line an important word, and the word is query. And that says, I'm asking you, and you have to pitch it in 1 paragraph. Now, I know lots of editors. That just means they're likely to read my query, and they're as likely to reject either the idea even before it's written or the final manuscript. I think it's about 6, 7 years ago, I referred to my editor at the New York Times. I love saying I have an editor at the New York Times. That just means that the same person rejects me all the time. But he said to me, you've cracked the code. I think I'd had my 4th or 5th op-ed in the New York Times at that point. And he said, you cracked the code. Because I knew what the basic formula was, what the New York Times was looking for. And what the New York Times is looking for is going to be different from what the Wall Street Journal is looking for on the same subject. They have different editorial slants. Now, that's not a personal relationship. You can't bypass. You can't say, oh, I know, Mr. Sulzberger, therefore it's going to get accepted. You may get it to the right person easier, where if you do know someone, you say, who may I send it to? But I've never had a personal relationship say, I've been rejected by every place that has published me more than a dozen times. And it's very nice, screw you very much, rejection letter. But sometimes it's just, formula that says, nope, doesn't work for us, thanks.
So when you get rejected, do you just hold on to that draft and then you make sure that it finds a way of getting published somewhere else and you just don't give up until...
I don't give up. There's not a pecking, we'll call it a pecking order. There's the waterfall. There are certain publications that are considered more difficult or more prestigious, and you can only send a manuscript to 1 place at a time and wait for that response. And if you get rejected, you go to the next one on your list. Now, the next one on your list, obviously, if I wrote something for the New York Times and I tried that place first, which is not always the case. Very often I'll go to, the Wall Street Journal first, because I just think this is a better article for the Wall Street Journal. And if they reject it and I want to pitch it to a different publication, you say, all right, what's the tone? What's the leaning? What is going to make this publication more likely to say yes? How do I have to adapt the article?
You said that you can only submit something to 1 place at a given time, right?
Right.
How do they enforce that?
You don't get published a second time if you send it to 2 places or more. They know. Because if you get 2 acceptances, what are you going to say? Oh, I sent it to 2 places at once. It's just one of these unwritten rules that now that you know it, to share it with everyone. everybody. Brown students are going to be way ahead of the game.
So you wrote this book about getting in.
I wrote 2 books called Getting In. One of them soon after I graduated from Brown.
So can you just talk a little bit about what your intention was behind that and how you see the process of getting into elite undergraduate institutions compared to law schools per se? I mean, obviously you can't speak to the admissions process to law school really, but
having not gone through it.
Exactly.
No, I do know though, because I've written some things about, I think I've written about law school a little bit. Look, I decided to write about college admissions when I was an undergraduate at Brown. And I had been fairly successful as an undergraduate. And I remember I was involved in these weekend events with potential large donors to the university. And, I would accompany them whatever events. And the thing that they got most into was not sitting in class. It wasn't, the sports event. It wasn't social thing. They got to play admission officer. And they had been given, I remember this is 1975, they were given 5 applications, actual applications, people who had applied to Brown the previous year, and the names were changed. And they were told, of the 5, you can accept 2. Now discuss. And they got to play admission officer. So what's the criteria? What are we looking for? And they were fascinated by it. And I was sort of amazed that I got into Brown. And I said, there must have been a quota for axe murderers that hadn't been filled, and I was second best. And so they took me. And I decided at that point I was going to write a book at some point about college admission. And one of my very best friends at Brown, we were both graduating, he was going to work in the admission office. And he rose to be number 2 in the Brown admission office during his 5-year tenure there. And one day, and before he even went, I said, Paulo, at some point you're going to leave the office and we're going to write a book together. I didn't know if it was going to be 5 years or 3 years or 9 years. Well, after 5 years, he decided he was going to leave, and we wrote this book. And it took us, it took us it was almost no time at all. The publisher wanted it right away. And I think it was like 4 weeks we wrote this entire book. And it became a national bestseller, the first edition of Getting In. And we were featured in everything from the Today Show to People magazine, because we talked about what really went on inside the admission office, how you can improve one's chances of getting in. We use the words a hook and positioning and packaging. And we did the same sort of case studies. And we created, I think it was 5 or 6 fake, applicants, and we sent them to a dozen schools. And we told the admissions director that these were fake applications, but would they treat them as real kids, real applicants? And 7 or 8 really good schools, including Brown, agreed to do it. And many of them didn't tell the admissions staff, nothing was computerized back then, that these were made up kids. And then they told us why they accepted or rejected each of the kids, and we included that in the book as well. So it was a great experience explaining what really was going on. It was my first time I ever tried writing, really, and we got very, very lucky, and it became a major success. And then I wrote another version of it, like 25 years with Paulo and 2 other people, 25 years later.
How was your co-author able to share things that presumably would be, sort of things that Brown wouldn't want you to share about the admissions process?
Well, when they share it now. What are the criteria that go into admissions? That Brown is not hiding. I think it was his knowledge of, and people, he goes around the country. All admission officers go around the country. And the first thing they say, we said something that was really unique at the time. Competitive schools are not looking for the well-rounded kid. They're looking for the well-rounded class. They need a flute player this year, but an oboe player next year. The football team needs a lineman this year and needs a running back next year. They need somebody for the student newspaper. They need people to populate every academic department. So they need a few, who are going to be great scientists, and a few are going to be great poets, and a few are going to be great engineers. And that's what comprises any class. And the same thing is true today. It was true then, it was true today. Except today it's way more competitive.
So I'm with you on all that. There have to be some things that happen in the admissions office that have to be kept private, though.
I'm
right?
sure there are. No, he never came out and said, oh, I didn't accept Tom because I thought he had the worst haircut I've ever seen. But what's the debate that goes on in any small group? If I gave you 5 applicants today and said you can accept, now it's gotten more competitive, one of them, what criteria are you going to use? Are you going to articulate what that criteria are? You're going to, because you're going to sit around the table and you're going to say, this is Tom Bickel. This is the guy who had, a 730 on his math, but only a 620 on his English. He's got, he stands 4th in his class. He was a really good hall hockey player, but, isn't going to make, the varsity team here. And they can debate, do we need this guy this year? What does he add to the class?
So how do you think college admissions differs from law school admissions? I would presume your answer is going to be something like law school admissions are much more empirical and there's much less sort of arbitrary consideration of how people fit into the class.
Yeah, it's almost all numerical. I don't know the exact formula, but a reasonably educated guess is that at least 80% of the decision is the LSAT score. And look, every law school publishes what their LSAT score, cutoff is, what the range is. You know where you're going to stand. And the other 20% of those, and some of them are objective as well. Does a 3.5 out of Brown equal a 3.5 at Joe's Community College? I don't know. You tell me.
Right.
How does a school assess that?
But the LSAT just has an enormous role in the process.
Yeah.
Before I move on to the next topic, just curious, do you think it's a good thing that the LSAT has so much to do with the process?
Having never taken it, I can't tell you. But obviously everybody's using it for a reason. Is it a good predictor of your ability to study for the LSAT? It's a great predictor on your willingness to study for the LSAT. So that shows some self-discipline. Is it a marker of how well you're going to do in law school? I don't know. I honestly don't know much about it. When I went to law school, they had a special class that started 2 weeks earlier for what I refer to as the dumb kids, i.e. me. And these were people who either had lower LSAT scores, had lower GPAs, or had been out of school for a while. So I qualified, basically on all accounts. I had a 0 LSAT. I had grades from 100 years ago when Bs were, a gentleman's C and a B, and Bs were fine in those days. Nobody had 3 9s except the really, really smart students. And I'd been out of school a long time. Well, we went to this program, and I met my study partner. Everybody who took that 2-week advanced course, who supposedly were more high risk because of the other markers. My study partner graduated first in the class. Another one of our study partners graduated second in the class. And I graduated 15th in the class because I got 1 C in law school in legal writing. I am the worst legal writer imaginable. I've written 7 books. I've written 250 articles. I'm the first person ever to have op-eds in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal on the same day. I cannot write a brief. I rewrite every brief that comes out of this place, trying to put it into English. But basic structure, I know what goes into it. I just can't do it.
It makes sense, right? It makes sense that would sort of not be your thing, right?
I asked my professor, the legal writing professor, do I need to write like this the way you want me? I'm getting C's on all my papers. Do I need to learn how to write like this to be a good lawyer or to get through this course? And he said, happily for you is to get through this course. Don't. Stick to the writing you do, and you'll adapt, and you'll fit in somehow. And I found my niche, and my niche is literally, I was up this morning at before 5 to file this brief that came in last night from our opponents in New York City government. It came in at 8:40, and we wanted to file this brief before 9 a.m. this morning. So closest thing to an all-nighter. And what I tried to do is make it more memorable. What is the judge? What are the judges? What's going to come off the page into the reader's mind? And that was something that Henry Luce, the founder of Time, and I worked for Time, as I said, taught everybody. It's not what you put on the paper that matters. It's what comes off the paper into the reader's mind that counts. And so I want to make sure the right message, the right story comes off the page and sticks with the judge or the jury.
Right. You must have certainly a unique perspective in that sense.
Yeah, I believe in the use of periods. I'm very serious. Whereas many lawyers believe in the use of, ellipses and lots of commas and long sentences and show me how smart you are. I want it to be clear. I want it to be convincing. And if that means shorter sentences, we better use more of them.
Do you find legal writing to be overly sophisticated?
No, I find it to be overly turgid. I find most of it horrific.
Such as Supreme Court opinions and things like that?
All opinions, from junior associates up to the Supreme Court. If it's clear, I believe it's more effective. You get people on both sides of the aisle who say, clear writing is, remember, you're trying to persuade someone, whether it's 9 judges on the Supreme Court or a trial judge in family court, to do something you want them to do. And why you think that confusing them or trying to impress them with complicated language is going to do that, beyond me. I've written a lot of op-eds. For a while, I was the chief editorial. I was actually practicing law. I was an associate at Kramer Dilloff, and I had a weekend job as the chief editorial writer for the New York Observer, which at the time was owned by Jared Kushner, who then went off and he sold his interest when his father-in-law went to the White House. And it was just a great experience to have to pitch 5 different editorials every Sunday morning and then be prepared to write 3 of them in 24 hours. And it could be about local, it could be about state, national, world, anything I wanted to write about. And nobody knew. Most people still don't know if I'm a Democrat or Republican. I'm an equal opportunity offender. If I can get you to think, I've done my job. I was very, very lucky, and I met this man years after I was out of Brown. I had a mentor who was actually from Providence, Rhode Island. And I'm going to bet you've never heard of him, but you know who played him in the movies, okay? Should I tell you who played him, or do you want to hear who my mentor was and why it's relevant?
Go for who played him first.
George Clooney. George Clooney played him in a movie that George Clooney actually directed called Good Night and Good Luck. You should see the movie. If you think about law school, very important movie. It's about a man named Edward R. Murrow. Edward R. Murrow was a CBS correspondent starting in World War II and then became the most influential man on television and is probably credited more than anyone else with ending the reign of terror of Senator Joe McCarthy. And Fred Friendly was Edward R. Murrow's producer and then became the president of CBS News. And after he resigned in protest from CBS News, when CBS decided to run soap operas and game shows instead of the Senate hearings on the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, he created something called PBS, or helped create something, PBS as we know it. And he had a TV series called The Constitution, The Delicate Balance, which ran for 20 years on TV, mostly on PBS, sometimes on CBS. And Fred would create these hypotheticals, and real people would have to debate what they would do and what the implications were and what the trade-offs between, but often around constitutional issues. And Fred became my mentor when I wanted to do a series, and we did one show on ethics in business. And he allowed me to do that. We did one show. And Fred's mantra was, it is my job to make you so uncomfortable that your only escape is to think. Now, a lot of people don't like that. And in fact, a lot of people I deal with, particularly in your generation, don't want to be challenged. They don't want to feel uncomfortable. I've had actually people say to me, this is not a safe space. Well, I believe in safe physical spaces, but not safe intellectual spaces. And
so let's just talk a little more specifically about some of the op-ed content that you've written about.
Sure.
We'll start with the call to national service that you've written about.
Yeah.
Can you just explain that a little bit more?
In fact, I'm going to explain what I've written about, what I'm continuing to write about, and what I think is very important for the nation. And that is, I think everyone, men, women, wealthy, poor, everybody should serve in a capacity, not military capacity, for 2 years. 18 months, 2 years, we'll figure that number out. And if you want to be in the military, you can choose to be in the military. But I think it's important for the nation. I think it's important for individuals. And what I mean by that, and whether it's working in a senior citizen or a pre-K or on an environmental conservation project, I think the nation would benefit from people working together, talking, experiencing things with people who are different from yourself. I think we have an obligation to a society to give back. We also don't have shared experiences in this country. Somebody who goes to Brown doesn't have a lot in common with someone who may get to a community college in Arkansas. And I think when you're exposed to people who are different from yourself, look, I spent 3 years in the Navy a long, long time ago. And it was probably one of the most important formative experiences of my life. My younger son, after going to college and working for a couple of years, joined the Marine Corps and loves it and hates it. Will probably make it a career, is my guess. And he has been exposed. I mean, he grew up in Manhattan, went to private school, you know, off to college. He has come into contact with people from such incredibly diverse backgrounds, and they have to work as a team. I think having that common experience is good for the individual and good for the nation. I think we don't talk to people we think we disagree with, and we have to learn how to find common ground. So I've been writing for the last couple of years about this idea, and candidly, it's not getting a lot of traction. It is not getting the debate. I've heard from Pete Buttigieg talked about it a little bit when he was running for office. We're hoping to have a debate either at Brown or at Yale. But it hasn't happened. I spoke with Intelligence Squared about having a debate, but I think people need to discuss things that make them uncomfortable. And this is one of them. Do you have an obligation to give back to society? Can you put off your self-interest for the common good for 2 years? That's what I'm trying to push for. And I'm not succeeding. So I'm really, truly open to hear from you or anybody else about how do you get people to at least discuss the idea? You don't have to agree with me, but discuss it.
How realistic do you think it is that kids would actually buy in?
It's funny, we did a poll and the answers were overwhelmingly positive. Yes, I'm in favor of this. Now, if you ask the question, are you ready to do it? Well, I really plan to go to graduate school. I really, it's going to interfere with my career. I want to go to medical school. I want to, you got to make a sacrifice somewhere. So I think it's a long shot. I am discouraged by the polarization of the nation. We self-isolate into tribes. We tend to talk to people who already agree with us. When I interview someone who wants to work, I don't care if it's as an assistant right out of Brown or somebody coming out of a clerkship, and every one of our lawyers, except me, has done a federal clerkship. We're snobs. That's our, we have people from all different law schools, but everybody has had a federal clerkship, which is, the snobby thing to do. And I asked 2 questions. I asked a lot of questions, but 2 of the questions I asked is, what did you read this morning and what are you going to read tonight? And then, what do you read or listen to that you don't already agree with? How do you get perspective? And people, what do you mean? What I already agree with? Huh? What are you talking about? And that says a lot. If you're not already seeking, am I in this bubble? Maybe I'm not hearing what I really should hear, a different perspective.
Try to just give me your best case. Persuade me. Why is it beneficial or useful to get into the top publications that you've mentioned so far?
Early on in my career, I thought about how am I going to distinguish myself from everybody else, most people who are smarter than me. And most people are smarter than me. I'm never the smartest person in the room. And I decided early on that one way that I could, it goes back to even to college admissions. How are you going to distinguish yourself among all those other kids coming from Winnetka High School, who all have 3.97 averages and all have, 1750 board score, SAT scores? How are you going to set yourself apart? What is it about you that's special? I decided early on that one way, in part because it was difficult, would be to get published. It would be a credential that would set me, wow, this guy actually got published. That's pretty cool. It was a talking point. It was a distinguishing factor for me to be seen different, to be remembered. This concept of positioning. How do we want the target audience, whether it's the dean of admissions or it's the person doing the hiring at a law firm, to remember Tom? What is it that's going to stick out? It's funny, I put something on my resume for years. One of the most unique experiences I ever had in my life was I was a football announcer at my son's high school. I knew nothing about football, but one of the fathers said, "Steve, we need you up in the booth." I said, "What are you talking about?" "Hey, you can talk." "I don't know anything about football," I said. "Don't worry, we'll tell you what to say." And they did. And I put that on a resume for a couple of years, and people were absolutely fascinated by the fact that I was a football announcer. And I love doing it. I still don't know a lot about football, but I know a lot more than I did. So getting published is something that it's a credential, and it works. I did not make law review because that C that I got in legal writing. And I tried to write on. I'm a competitive guy. I tried to write up, which is, you write an essay. I still got rejected. The faculty advisor said, this just is not law review material. Oh my God, it's not law review material. I graduated from law school, and the first article I get published is in the Penn State Law Review. And the editor says to me, this reads nothing like a law review article. It reads like an Atlantic magazine piece with 104 footnotes. And that was my intention. And so I wanted the law review on my resume. This is how, and I also, now that's one part of it. And the others, I want to influence. I want to influence public policy. I wanted to influence. And in fact, we got some legislation passed in part because of this writing. And as a lawyer, I want to do the best by my clients. Sometimes that's in the courtroom. Sometimes it can be in the legislature. Can you affect the debate? We have a horrific case right now. And this is worth a 30-second diversion. A man called me 3 years ago, and he said, I want to tell you about my 47-year-old wife. We have a 15-year-old son. She's a teacher. And 4 months ago, she had pain in her leg. So she went to the doctor. She's the responsible one. Doctor took an x-ray, said, I don't see anything. I want you to have physical therapy twice a week for 6 weeks. Take Tylenol, try Advil, see if hot compresses work or cold packs. But I want you to do the physical therapy twice a week. Come back to me and tell me if it's better. And she does it religiously for twice a week. She comes back, just, it's worse. He takes another x-ray, says, I still don't see anything. I want you to see a specialist. And she goes the very next day to an orthopedist who looks at the film and said, I still don't see anything. I want you to have an MRI. And he calls the insurance company for approval, what's called prior authorization for the MRI. And the insurance company says, nope, it's not medically necessary until she's finished 6 weeks of physical therapy. The doctor says, wait a minute. Not only has she finished the 6 weeks of physical therapy, you, the insurance company, paid for it. He said, you don't like the decision, you can appeal it. He did. It took 38 days. They reversed. She got her MRI. And what did it show? Cancer in her hip. She goes to the Sloan Kettering, the best, probably the best cancer hospital here in New York. And they said to her, had you come here a month sooner, 30 days, we would have used just chemo to treat you. We're still going to use chemo. But first, we're going to amputate your leg, your hip, and your pelvis. And they did. And she died 2 years later. We sued on behalf of the family, that insurance company, and we lost because there is no law that holds insurance company accountable when they commit medical malpractice, when they are negligent. There's just no law. Hospitals, nurses, doctors, podiatrists, dentists, they're covered by the law, but never insurance companies. We're appealing that case, so we're going the legal route, but that's also what I'm writing about, because we have to change that law, and that law has to get changed in the legislature. So that's why I write. And it's an ego boost. Don't let anybody tell you, when you see your name in print, it is great. You say, wow, it comes out, and then you say, wow, when's it coming out again? What's the next thing I have to write? I need that high. So I am a big believer in writing.
And are you confident that it's reaching a broad audience?
You try to reach any audience you can, the best audience, the right audience. When you publish in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and Time Magazine and The Hill, you reach a pretty broad audience. And then you have to use social media to put it out there even further. And it's just the nature of the world. And is it having an impact? I don't have the slightest clue. My ego likes to think that it does, but I don't. But I keep doing it anyway.
Last question, and just take where you want with this, is just speaking to Brown students in particular. What's your advice to undergraduates?
Really enjoy yourself first. Take as many things as you possibly can. There's no right path. But here's the thing that I look for when I hire people. And people say, what's the most important, not criteria, I guess criteria or, characteristic, I guess is the better word. I want people with intellectual curiosity who are willing to engage and think. And it's easy to knock my ideas down. I have a lot of ideas. Many of them are really bad. And the people, and I know, and people are going to push back and say, that's a terrible idea, Steve. And I get it. The ones who are the most interesting are the ones who do that and then say, What if you thought about it from this perspective or that angle? And to do that, you really have to have intellectual curiosity. And I'm concerned. I make people read. On the other side of this wall we hire people out of good colleges for 2 years, and we call them analysts, legal analysts. And it's partly administrative paralegal work and partly really good research. And we refer to them as the J team, which does not stand for the junior team. It stands for their names. It just so happens that everybody we've ever hired has a name starting with J. So we have John and Julia and Josh and Jason. I'm serious. It's crazy. If you don't have a J, you can't work for us. But I want, I asked them to read and share every Sunday night an obituary. People don't read, kids coming out of college don't read obituaries, but you should, because history is made by people. And the people who have obituaries written about them may have done something really interesting. I want them to read things that they're not used to reading and to be curious.